the world before Yarmouk imagine, a world where two colossal empires, Rome and Persia, have dominated for centuries, their borders stretching as far as the eye can see. These superpowers have clashed, schemed, and ruled with iron fists, believing no force could ever challenge their supremacy. But in the heart of Arabia, something unexpected was brewing. A new power was rising, one that the world's mightiest armies had dismissed as little more than desert tribes. Yet, within just a few years, these so-called desert warriors had already shaken the foundations of the ancient world. At the center of this storm stood a man whose name would become legendary, Khalid bin Walid, known as the Sword of Allah. His battlefield genius had turned impossible odds into stunning victories. Under his command, the Muslim armies had swept through city after city, toppling fortresses that had stood for generations. The Romans, who once looked down on the Arabs, now watched in disbelief as their own strongholds fell one by one. But just as the Muslims seemed unstoppable, a decision from their own leadership sent shockwaves through the ranks. Hazrat Umar, the new caliph, made a move that no one saw coming. He removed Khalid bin Walid from his position as army chief. The man who had never lost a battle, the hero of so many conquests, was suddenly sidelined. Whispers spread like wildfire. Was it jealousy? Was Umar afraid that Khalid's fame was overshadowing the caliphate itself? Or was there a deeper, more strategic reason behind this shocking change? The soldiers were stunned. Some questioned the wisdom of their leaders, while others wondered if this was the beginning of the end for their meteoric rise. The Romans, hearing of Khalid's removal, saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the tide was about to turn in their favor. But the truth behind Umar's decision remained a tightly guarded secret, fueling rumors and uncertainty on both sides of the battlefield. Yet, as history would soon reveal, this was only the calm before the storm. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only decide the fate of empires, but also rewrite the destiny of an entire region. And as the armies gathered on the plains of Yarmouk, no one could have predicted just how explosive the coming days would be. That the power struggle and leadership twist, removal of Khalid bin Walid as army chief, didn't just shock the soldiers, it sent ripples through the entire Muslim world. For many, it was unthinkable. How could the very leader who had delivered victory after victory be replaced at the height of his success? The new caliph, Hazrat Umar, appointed Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah as the new commander, a man known for his humility and unwavering faith, but not for the same battlefield brilliance as Khalid. The decision left everyone guessing. Was this a calculated move, or a gamble that could cost them everything? Rumors began to swirl. Some whispered that Umar feared Khalid's growing popularity, worried that the people's loyalty might shift from the caliphate to the general. Others speculated that Umar wanted to remind everyone that no one, not even the greatest warrior, was above the system of leadership and accountability in Islam. There were even those who believed that Umar saw a different kind of strength in Abu Ubaidah, leader who could unite the army not just through fear or force, but through character and principle. But the timing couldn't have been more dangerous. The Roman Empire, sensing an opportunity, started to regroup and reinforce their positions. Their spies reported back that the Muslims were in disarray, their confidence shaken by the sudden change at the top. The Romans believed that without Khalid's tactical genius, the Muslim army would be easier to defeat. They began to plot, hoping to exploit the confusion and strike a decisive blow. Inside the Muslim camp, the mood was tense. Some soldiers felt betrayed, others confused. Khalid himself, despite being removed from command, showed no sign of bitterness. Instead, he pledged his loyalty to Abu Ubaidah and the caliphate, setting an example that silenced many doubters. But even with Khalid's support, the pressure on Abu Ubaidah was immense. He knew that every move he made would be scrutinized, every decision compared to the legendary general he had replaced. Yet, in the midst of this uncertainty, something remarkable began to happen. The army, instead of fracturing, started to rally around their new leader. Abu Ubaidah's calm demeanor and deep sense of justice won over many hearts. He listened to his generals, sought advice, and made it clear that victory would come not just from strategy, but from unity and faith. Still, the shadow of Khalid's absence loomed large, and everyone wondered, could Abu Ubaidah fill the shoes of a man who had never tasted defeat? As the days passed, the Muslim army moved forward, their eyes fixed on the horizon and the challenges ahead. The Romans, emboldened by the leadership change, prepared for a confrontation they believed would finally end the Muslim advance. But beneath the surface, the Muslims were forging a new kind of strength, one built, not just on the sword, but on the power of conviction and the willingness to stand together, no matter the odds. And as the armies drew closer to the fateful plains of Yarmouk, the world watched, waiting to see if this leadership twist would spell disaster or set the stage for one of history's most astonishing turnarounds. The siege of Emesa and the winter standoff has the leadership drama unfolded. The Muslim army pressed deeper into enemy territory, their next targets set on the formidable city of Emesa, known today as Homs. This was no ordinary city. Emesa was a fortress, its towering walls guarded by a wide, icy moat, and its defenders confident that no invader could ever breach its defenses. The Romans believed the harsh winter would do their work for them, freezing the resolve of the desert-born soldiers who had never known such cold. The Muslims, led now by Abu Ubaidah, found themselves facing not just the enemy, but the biting chill of a foreign winter. Snow blanketed the ground, and the wind cut through their thin Arabian garments. Supplies ran low, and morale began to waver. For the first time, the idea of retreat crept into the minds of the soldiers. Some wondered if this was a sign that the removal of Khalid bin Walid had doomed their campaign. Others simply struggled to survive the relentless cold. Days turned into weeks, and the siege dragged on with no end in sight. The Romans inside Emesa watched with growing confidence as the Muslim army they mocked their enemies, certain that the Arabs would soon give up and return to the warmth of their homeland. And then, just as the Romans predicted, the Muslims began to withdraw. It was a moment that stunned both sides. Never before had the Muslim army abandoned a siege. The defenders of Emesa celebrated, convinced that victory was theirs. But what happened next would become the stuff of legend. As the Roman general ordered his troops to pursue the retreating Muslims and drive them out for good, he made a fatal mistake. Eager to finish the job, the Roman soldiers left the safety of their walls and charged into the open, believing the enemy was on the run. But the Muslims, instead of fleeing, suddenly turned and attacked with ferocious speed. It was a trap, one that caught the Romans completely off guard. In a matter of moments, the tables turned. The Roman forces, now exposed and outmaneuvered, were overwhelmed. Their general fell in battle, and the once celebrating defenders of Emesa watched in horror as their army was decimated outside the city gates. The Muslims, seizing the momentum, returned to the city and surrounded it once more. This time, the people of Emesa didn't resist. They opened their gates and surrendered. Stunned by the cunning and resilience of their adversaries, whispers spread through the ranks that this brilliant maneuver had the fingerprints of Khalid bin Walid all over it. Even though he was no longer the official commander, his influence was impossible to ignore. Abu Ubaidah's willingness to listen to his generals and, perhaps to Khalid himself, had turned a near disaster into a stunning victory. The siege of Emesa became a turning point, not just for the campaign, but for the morale of the entire army. The Muslims had proven that they could adapt, outthink, and outlast even the most daunting challenges. But as they celebrated their hard-won triumph, a new message arrived from Medina, one that would change the course of the war yet again. The story of Yarmouk was far from over, and the next twist would leave everyone questioning what the future held. Umar's mysterious orders. Just as the Muslim army was savoring its victory at Emesa, a new twist arrived, one that no one could have predicted. A messenger, breathless from his journey across the harsh deserts, arrived at the Muslim camp, carrying a letter sealed with the authority of Caliph Umar himself. The contents of this letter would send shockwaves through the ranks and leave even the most seasoned generals questioning their next move. The message was clear and direct. The Muslim army was to halt its advance immediately. No more cities were to be conquered beyond Emesa. The order was absolute, no exceptions, no negotiations. For an army that had been on a relentless march, toppling city after city, this sudden command felt like a thunderclap. Soldiers and commanders alike were left stunned, their momentum abruptly cut short by a single sheet of parchment. Speculation erupted almost instantly. Why would Umar, a leader known for his strategic brilliance, suddenly call for a halt? Some believed he feared the army was stretching itself too thin, risking disaster by pushing too far into enemy territory. Others whispered that Umar was wary of the intoxicating lure of conquest, that he didn't want the Muslim empire to become just another kingdom, obsessed with land and power. There were even those who wondered if Umar had received intelligence about a looming threat, something so grave that it demanded a complete change in strategy. The impact on the army was immediate. The soldiers, who had grown accustomed to victory after victory, now found themselves in a strange limbo. The energy that had propelled them forward began to wane. The Romans, sensing the shift, started to regroup and rebuild their shattered forces. For the first time, the unstoppable Muslim advance seemed to falter. But Umar's decision was not made lightly. He understood the dangers of unchecked expansion. History was filled with empires that had grown too fast, only to collapse under their own weight. Umar wanted something different. He envisioned a society built not just on conquest, but on justice, faith, and stability. He sent a second letter to Abu Ubaidah, reminding him that his role was no longer just that of a military commander, but of a governor and teacher. The mission was to establish a just system, to show the world a new kind of rule, one based on principles, not just power. This shift in focus was unprecedented. Instead of pressing forward, the Muslims began to consolidate their gains. They set up systems of governance, introduced fair taxation, and established courts to ensure justice for all, regardless of faith or background. The people of the newly conquered lands, who had braced themselves for oppression, were instead met with fairness and respect. Many were shocked to see their taxes returned when the Muslim army withdrew, a gesture that won hearts and changed minds. Yet, while the Muslims worked to strengthen their hold on the region, the Romans were not idle. The pause gave them precious time to regroup, to forge new alliances, and to prepare for a counterattack. Rumors began to swirl of a massive army gathering, one that would dwarf anything the Muslims had faced before. The stage was being set for a confrontation unlike any the world had seen, a battle that would test not just the strength of armies, but the very ideals that Umar had set in motion. And as the tension mounted, one question lingered in the minds of all. Had Umar's mysterious orders saved the Muslim army from disaster? Or had they given their enemies the chance they needed to strike back with a vengeance? The unthinkable alliance. While the Muslim army paused to regroup and establish order, a storm was brewing far beyond their sight, one that would shake the foundations of the ancient world. For centuries, the Roman and Persian empires had been bitter rivals, locked in a relentless struggle for dominance. Their enmity was legendary, their wars spanning generations. The idea of these two superpowers ever joining forces seemed as impossible as fire and water becoming friends. Yet, in the shadow of the Muslim advance, the unthinkable began to unfold. Word spread quickly through the courts of Byzantium and Persia. The Muslims were not just another raiding force, they were a rising power, and their victories were no fluke. The Romans, battered and humiliated by recent defeats, realized they could no longer afford to fight on two fronts. Desperation led to a move that stunned the world. The Roman Emperor Heraclius reached out to his old enemy, the Persian king, with an offer of peace and, more than that, an alliance sealed by marriage. In a move that would have been laughed off as fantasy just years before, Heraclius offered his granddaughter's hand to the Persian royal family, turning ancient foes into family. The news sent shockwaves across the region. For the first time in nearly 8 centuries, the two greatest empires of the age were not just allies, but bound by blood. Diplomats and generals who had spent their lives plotting against each other now sat at the same tables, sharing strategies and resources. The message was clear. The Muslim threat had become so great that even the deepest hatreds could be set aside. Inside the Muslim camp, rumors of this alliance began to circulate. Some dismissed it as impossible, a wild tale meant to sow fear. But as reports trickled in from spies and scouts, the truth became undeniable. The Romans and Persians were massing their armies, pooling their resources, and preparing for a joint campaign. The scale of the threat was unlike anything the Muslims had ever faced. Suddenly, the pause ordered by Umar seemed even more perilous. Had the Caliph's caution given their enemies the time they needed to unite? The psychological impact was immediate. Soldiers who had once felt invincible now faced the prospect of fighting not one, but two empires at once. The sense of being surrounded, of standing alone against the world, grew heavier with each passing day. Yet, in the face of this looming danger, a new kind of determination began to take root. The Muslims had always been outnumbered, always the underdogs. Now, with the odds stacked higher than ever, their resolve only hardened. Meanwhile, the Romans and Persians wasted no time. Massive armies began to assemble, their banners filling the horizon. The Romans called upon every province, conscripting young men by the thousands. The Persians sent their finest warriors, eager to prove themselves in this historic alliance. The two empires, once mortal enemies, now drilled side by side, their generals plotting a campaign that would crush the Muslim advance once and for all. But as the world watched this unprecedented alliance take shape, a question lingered in the air. Could centuries of hatred truly be set aside, or was this partnership doomed by the very history that had brought them together? And more importantly, would the Muslims find a way to survive when the full weight of two empires came crashing down upon them? The answer would soon be revealed on the windswept plains of Yarmouk, where destinies would collide and the fate of an entire region would hang in the balance. That the Muslims' dilemma and the return of Caliph, the shadow of the Roman-Persian alliance grew longer. The Muslim army found itself caught in a tightening vice. On one side, a massive Roman force was gathering, its numbers swelling with every passing day. On the other, unrest simmered in the newly conquered territories, where local populations, emboldened by rumors of a Roman resurgence, began to rebel. The Muslims, once the unstoppable force sweeping through the region, now faced the very real threat of being crushed between external enemies and internal chaos. The pressure was relentless. Reports flooded in from every direction. Christian communities in Jordan and Syria were rising up. Roman scouts were spotted near key cities, and the Persians were rumored to be preparing their own assault. The sense of isolation was palpable. For the first time, the Muslim generals realized that holding their ground would require more than just courage. It would demand strategy, unity, and a willingness to make difficult choices. In this moment of crisis, the leadership of Abu Ubaidah was put to the ultimate test. He called a council of his top generals, including the legendary Khalid bin Walid, who, despite his official demotion, remained a vital presence in the army. The debate was intense. Some argued for a defensive stand in the cities, while others urged a strategic withdrawal to regroup and avoid being surrounded. The stakes could not have been higher. A single misstep could spell disaster for the entire campaign. Abu Ubaidah made a bold decision. Rather than risk being trapped in hostile territory, he ordered a withdrawal from the exposed cities, including the prized stronghold of Emesa. But this retreat was unlike any other in history. Before leaving, Abu Ubaidah instructed his officers to return the jizya tax collected from the local non-Muslim population, a gesture that stunned the residents. The message was clear. The Muslims had only taken the tax in exchange for protection, and if they could no longer guarantee safety, they had no right to keep the money. This act of integrity left a deep impression, with some locals even praying for the Muslims' return. The withdrawal was swift and disciplined. The Muslim forces regrouped near the Yarmouk River, a location chosen for its strategic advantages. Here, with their backs to the Arabian heartland and all enemies in front, they could face the coming storm on their own terms. It was a gamble, but one that offered a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. As the armies assembled at Yarmouk, a quiet but significant shift occurred within the Muslim ranks. The generals, recognizing the scale of the threat, agreed that extraordinary times called for extraordinary leadership. In a move that was both practical and symbolic, Abu Ubaidah stepped aside as battlefield commander, reinstating Khalid bin Walid to lead the army in the coming clash. The decision electrified the troops. Khalid's reputation as an undefeated strategist inspired confidence, and his return to command sent a clear message. The Muslims were ready to fight with everything they had, but the challenges were far from over. The Roman army, now swollen to nearly 200,000 men, was closing in. Their banners darkened the horizon, and their generals boasted that the Muslim army would be wiped out in a single blow. Yet, within the Muslim camp, a sense of unity and purpose began to take hold. They were outnumbered, surrounded, and facing the greatest military alliance the world had ever seen. But they were also determined, disciplined, and led by a commander whose very name struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. As the sun set over the plains of Yarmouk, both armies prepared for a battle that would decide the fate of empires. The Muslims, battered but unbroken, stood shoulder to shoulder, ready to face whatever came next. And as Khalid bin Walid surveyed the field, he knew that the coming days would test not just his tactics, but the very spirit of his people. The stage was set. The world held its breath. The greatest battle of the age was about to begin. The battle begins, chaos and heroism. As dawn broke over the plains of Yarmouk, the air was thick with tension. On one side, the Roman army stretched as far as the eye could see, an ocean of armor, banners, and war-hardened faces. On the other, the Muslim forces, vastly outnumbered but burning with resolve, stood ready for the fight of their lives. The ground itself seemed to tremble under the weight of history about to be made. The opening moments of the battle were a storm of chaos. The Romans, confident in their overwhelming numbers, launched a series of aggressive attacks, hoping to shatter the Muslim lines with sheer force. Waves of infantry crashed against the Muslim ranks, their shields gleaming in the morning sun. But the Muslims, under Khalid bin Walid's iron command, held firm. Every man knew that retreat was not an option. Behind them lay only the desert, and in front, the might of two empires, yet the pressure was immense. The Romans targeted the flanks, trying to break the Muslim army apart. At times, the lines wavered, and panic threatened to spread. In these desperate moments, an unexpected force emerged. The women of the Muslim camp. Many had traveled with their families, and now, seeing their men falter, they refused to stand by. With fierce determination, they formed a barrier of camels and supplies, blocking any retreat. Some picked up swords, others hurled stones, and all shouted words of encouragement, or shamat. The wavering soldiers, their courage was contagious. Shamed and inspired, the men rallied, pushing back against the Roman onslaught. The battle raged for days, each sunrise bringing new horrors and new acts of heroism. On the second day, the Romans tried to catch the Muslims off guard with a surprise dawn attack, but Khalid, ever the master tactician, had anticipated their move. The Muslims were ready, meeting the assault head-on. Still, the fighting was brutal. The right and left wings of the Muslim army were pushed to their limits, sometimes falling back all the way to the camp. Each time, the women's defiance turned the tide, reminding the men that their families, their faith, and their future depended on their courage. Amid the chaos, stories of individual bravery spread like wildfire. There were tales of Roman soldiers defecting, inspired by the Muslims' discipline and faith. One such man, George, left the Roman ranks, embraced Islam, and fought alongside his former enemies only to fall in battle the very same day. There were also moments of betrayal and fear, as some local tribes considered switching sides, tempted by the promise of Roman gold or revenge. But Khalid's leadership and the unity of the core Muslim ranks kept the army from fracturing. The psychological warfare was relentless. Roman generals tried to intimidate the Muslims with boasts of their emperor's power and the might of their alliance. Khalid responded with calm defiance, reminding his men that their leader was not a king, but a caliph chosen for his character, not his crown. Even the sons of the caliphs fought as ordinary soldiers, a living testament to the values that set this army apart. As the days wore on, exhaustion set in. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and the fields of Yarmouk were stained with the cost of ambition and faith. But the Muslims, though battered, refused to break. Their lines held, their spirits unbroken, and their eyes fixed on Khalid, who moved tirelessly from one end of the battlefield to the other, rallying his men and outmaneuvering the enemy at every turn. The world watched in disbelief as the vastly outnumbered Muslims not only survived, but began to turn the tide. The stage was set for a final, decisive move, one that would either seal their fate or carve their names into the annals of history forever. The turning point collided. The sun rose on what would become the final day of the Battle of Yarmouk. Both armies were battered and weary, but the tension in the air was electric. The Romans, still confident in their numbers, believed that one last push would finally break the Muslim lines. Their generals, desperate to end the stalemate, ordered a massive assault, sending wave after wave of soldiers crashing into the Muslim ranks. The ground shook with the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel, and for a moment, it seemed as if the Muslims might finally be overwhelmed. But Khalid bin Walid had been waiting for this very moment. Throughout the long days of battle, he had studied every move, every weakness in the Roman formation. He knew that brute force alone would not win this war. What was needed was a stroke of genius, a move so unexpected that it would shatter the enemy's confidence and turn the tide once and for all. In the chaos of battle, Khalid gave a secret signal. Suddenly, from behind a nearby ridge, a hidden cavalry unit 8,000 strong charged into the fray. These horsemen, hand-picked and positioned in secret the night before, thundered down upon the Roman right flank with devastating speed. The Romans, caught completely off guard, reeled in confusion. Their carefully organized lines crumbled as panic spread through their ranks. At the same time, Khalid himself led a fierce assault on the Roman center, driving deep into their formation. The coordination was flawless. The Muslims, inspired by the sudden appearance of their cavalry and the fearless leadership of Khalid, surged forward with renewed energy. The Romans, now attacked from multiple sides, began to falter. Their generals shouted orders, but the chaos was too great. Soldiers who had once believed in certain victory now scrambled to escape the tightening noose. The route was swift and merciless. Roman soldiers fled toward the only bridge across the Yarmouk River, desperate to escape the slaughter. But Khalid had anticipated this as well. Another division of Muslim troops, hidden near the bridge, blocked their path. Trapped between the river and the relentless Muslim advance, thousands of Roman soldiers were cut down or forced into the water, their hopes of escape dashed in an instant. The Roman general, Vahan, realizing the battle was lost, tried to flee but was hunted down and killed. The once mighty Roman army, which had come to crush the Muslims with overwhelming force, was now in full retreat, its banners trampled and its legacy shattered. The battlefield, once a symbol of Roman power, was now a testament to the brilliance and audacity of Khalid bin Walid. As the dust settled, the scale of the victory became clear. The Muslims, against all odds, had not only survived, but had utterly destroyed one of the largest armies ever assembled against them. The news spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the region. The language, culture, and very identity of the land would never be the same. But for Khalid and his men, the victory was more than just a military triumph. It was proof that courage, unity, and faith could overcome even the greatest of odds. The Battle of Yarmouk was over, but its legacy was just beginning, a legacy that would echo through history, changing the fate of empires and the destiny of millions.